Welcome everyone to our webinar on Decentralized Autonomous Organizations to Revolutionize the Way We Work. My name is Wika. I will be your host for this webinar. First of all, thank you very much for all our speakers who have been joining us today, and for all of our attendees for attending the webinar. Please welcome Mr. Johan Verhul as the CEO of Itsavirus as the moderator for today's webinar. Hi, Johan.
Hello, Vika. Thanks again for hosting this webinar. Looking forward to this one because this one is very, very special, of course. I remember as a student of economic sociology, we also did deep dives into new forms of organizations. And even back then, like these egalitarian organizations were mentioned, like because they have their roots in the like in the late 60s, early 70s, where tech hippies, of course, came to us as we know it. And they already had concepts of organizations in which everyone is more or less equal. Depending on their contribution, they will earn their rewards, and the rules of the organization will then be programmed into software, which back then was very revolutionary, of course, and maybe quite difficult to execute. But by now we are living in a moment where it might actually be possible. There are still a lot of hurdles to take. But I think blockchain technology, crypto assets have played a big part in making DAOs more possible. And you see, of course, the rise of many DAOs already. And you can even argue that the entire crypto space operates already as a big DAO. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having the speakers here. Mr. Branson Lee, Alex Puig, and Stefano. Thank you for joining as well. I'm really happy to have you guys here, and yeah, looking forward for a presentation. But also, what we will do is have a more open discussion and debate on certain topics. And I think we will focus especially on regulations, because we have quite a lot of knowledge on board with the speakers in terms of regulations and DAOs, and of course in terms of technology, what is helping us now, but what is also preventing people from developing these DAOs. So that's it for me in regards to the introduction, Vika. Maybe we can start with the first speaker. And for everyone listening, feel free to interrupt, send messages in the chat, and when there is a good moment, we will start asking the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan, for your introduction. So let me introduce our speakers. We are very proud to have 3 great speakers. Each speaker has a unique and different background, which will be very interesting to see. We have Mr. Alex Puig as the co-founder and CTO of Kylum Labs. Mr. Alex is a software developer and tech entrepreneur with extensive experience in blockchain and self-sovereign identity. He's a co-founder and CTO, a startup working on middleware to decentralize identity and give back control on the people's data to people themselves. Hello, Mr. Alex.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us today. And the next speakers, I will introduce you to Mr. Branson Lee. He's the executive counselor from Blockchain Association Singapore, APAC Crypto Wordplay. Mr. Branson Lee is an EXCO member since 2017, as well as the Token Economy Association. He has over 10 years of experience in sales management in business, information, and technology companies, dealing with the government, statutory boards, financial institutions, corporates in Southeast Asia. Having started off his career as an engineer with Sun Microsystems, he is currently the CEO of digital asset exchange, ECXX.com. Hello, Mr. Branson Lee.
Hi,
How
everyone.
are you?
Hi, good.
Good.
Good afternoon,
Thank you very
good morning.
much for speaking in today's webinar.
Yeah.
And for the next, Mr. Stefano Virgili, as the Chief Marketing Officer from Strips Finance. Mr. Stefano is a veteran within the decentralized world. He has over 20 years of experience as a marketeer, entrepreneur, public speaker, and strategic consultant. Currently, he is involved with the Strips.Finance team to bring power to the community behind the project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on board.
Hello, Mr. Stefano Virgili. How are you?
Fine. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for making the time to speak today. Okay, so next, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Mr. Branson Lee to speak first.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi,
thanks,
Mr.
thanks,
Branson
Vika.
Lee. Yeah.
Thanks, Joachim. Okay, so I prepared a little bit of information on DAO. So maybe I'll share that and then perhaps we can have a discussion after that. Just 1 second. Let me just share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I think as Joachim has introduced, I think DAO is a very interesting concept. In fact, I think it has gotten a lot of traction over the years. And of course, we just heard 2 days ago interesting news about the DAO hack from Ethereum. I'm not going to go into that, but suffice to say, I think for the year 2022 and perhaps also the following year, I think we will see a lot more experimentation and also discussions about what is a DAO and how do we go about setting up a DAO. Okay, so very quickly I'll go through some of this agenda. So I'll talk about what is a DAO at a very high level understanding, and then some considerations, the basic components, the current software stack out there that is available for everyone to use, some comparisons, examples of DAO, and we end off with a look at the DAO landscape. Okay, so at the very high level, the DAO stack is actually like what some of the speakers have mentioned. It is not it's not very foreign, to be honest. It is a different way of working. But essentially, what we are saying is that instead of having a traditional company being set up, and of course, as you can see on the screen, this is a Delaware C Corp. But in the DAO, there's no such thing. Essentially, we're working all decentralized, right? And of course, it's called Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Everything runs on smart contracts, right? And payment processing can be your typical payment processors like Stripe and so on and so forth. But again, everything runs on smart contracts in the DAO. Okay, so everything is actually utilizes the concept of tokens, right? And with the token itself, you can actually acquire voting rights and so on and so forth, right? Depending on what the token confers in terms of the usage. Okay, and the community then becomes very, very important part of the DAO feature, right? What we're trying to do here, as you can tell, is to flatten the structure, right? Essentially, everyone has a say and everyone can have a say, right? So that's the essence of converting the usual way of working towards a DAO. Okay. In fact, if you look at the way we work nowadays, right? I'm based in Singapore now, and then probably Joachim is in Bali and things like that. But every one of us, we are all in different parts of the world, but we are still taking part in a webinar here, right? So perhaps that is the new way of working. Okay. So that's the first part. So what does DAO enables? It enables a lot of things, right? It could be fundraising, it could be community-led decision making. As I've mentioned earlier, it could be flattening the structure. you can have transparent capital flows. In other words, you are able to do very quick audit and understand where the different funds are going, what are the fund flows into which projects, and what is it being used for. Okay, and potentially the community could be made up of the employees, people who run the projects, and customers, right? It could be people who actually make use of the software or the app. Okay, so in terms of considerations, I think this is the crux of the issue, right? While it is easy to talk about DAOs and what it is and things like that, but when it comes to setting up one, it is not as straightforward, right? You have to think about the governance, right? And here, there are a lot of moving parts, right? For example, who can make proposals, right? And that means, you know, can you put through any types of proposals, or do you confer certain importance to certain proposals, right? And I had an interesting discussion with another lawyer recently, and we had this idea that, you know, maybe you do not want anyone to just put a proposal, right? Because then it could slow down the entire, you know, or it could actually hamper the efficiency of DAO itself, right? So the question is, do you even want to let everyone make a proposal? Maybe not, right? So again, it is a question up for discussion. And recently, I also heard on a podcast, very interesting question, which is, for example, if you fly a plane, do you want the passengers to have a say in the engine, the manufacturing of the engine of the aircraft? Maybe not, right? So certain decisions or certain proposals should be left to the technical experts out there or people who are more competent, right? So that's an example. And then things like, should the DAO be open to a lot of people, or should it be a single person? Should there be veto rights and so on and so forth? This is another thing that needs to be considered, okay? And of course, the communication part, right? Some DAOs can be huge, right? Maybe 10,000, 20,000 people. How do you create a forum or a channel for people to communicate effectively, okay? And something which is very interesting could be things like, can you separate the monetary wealth from the voting rights itself, right? Because we know that when there are voting rights, obviously there could be vote rigging, right? Or vote buying. How do you prevent that, right? Should you assign reputation score to people, and how do you do that, right? Could it be based on seniority, how long you've been in the community, or so on and so forth? And should it be slashed, right? And then of course, there's another mechanism, like if you don't really like what's going on, can you just quit, right? So these are some very interesting examples or considerations that that goes into, you know, setting up a DAO. Okay, so at the very base layer, how do you set up a DAO? 4 very important components. You need the community, which you can run using Discord. Of course, Discord itself is a challenge. It's extremely difficult to use, and a lot of things are going on, right? And the next part could be the treasury management, right? And of course, you need multi-sig, right? You can't have one person holding the key to the entire treasury, right? And then the governance framework. This is what I mentioned earlier, which is how do you ensure that there's voting, right? And voting that happens in a precise manner, right? Is it on chain or off chain, right? That's another question. And finally, how do you distribute the ownership of the tokens, right? And again, you could have some other tools that help you do that, right? And of course, the entire thing is being wrapped around in a mission, right? So all DAOs should have a mission, right? If you have a DAO which is rudderless, that means they don't have a mission or a vision, then chances are the DAO will fail, right? Because you don't know where you're going. And as what they say, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter where you go, right? So that's the thing. Now, let us take a look at some of the DAO software out there. You know, I think some of us have seen the logos here. There's Aragon, DAO Stack, Colony, and Moloch, right? So again, I'm not going to go through every single thing, but each of them have their own way of allowing different people to use the software to do different things. right? I'll go into the Aragon example later on because I have a few slides on that. But interestingly, they have different ways of looking at the governance of DAO, right? So for example, for DAO stack, they believe that attention span is the most important, right? So therefore they want to focus on that, right? And they use a small number of participants to do a sort of a test, a temperature test, right? And then later on, if it gain a lot more traction, then it can be put up for actual voting, right? For colony, it's slightly different. They use this concept of time, right? And they realize that, hey, you know what? We need to focus on the day-to-day stuff. So chances are, you need to make sure that you don't have too many of these proposals being put up and people are spending too much time voting and instead of doing the actual work, right? So this is how they assign time as well as reputation to some of the voting rights, okay? And finally, for Moloch, they want to get rid of bad governance, and they also use time, but they have this interesting mechanism called rage quit. In other words, if let's say the proposal goes through, right, with the minimum amount of votes, and you don't like it, then you can just vote to quit, and then you take back whatever share that you have in the DAO. Okay, so again, very quickly run through. Aragon is very interesting because I saw that they have a very modular approach to setting up a DAO. So they have things like Aragon client, govern, and things like that. Most of the time for Aragon, the proposals are scheduled to run without voting. Okay, so in other words, if there's no voting, it is assumed to be passed, right? Only if there is a challenge, then you have the next part, which is the court, right? And then, of course, you can draft in guardians. In fact, people can actually be some of these so-called judges, right? And they can actually be paid for educating some of these disputes. Okay, let's look at some examples. Okay, so we have Curve DAO. In fact, I think the interesting part about Curve DAO is that it is said to be one of the most robust concept or DAO governance out there. So maybe this is worth something worth taking a look. Okay, so they have something called the vote escrowed CRV token. Okay, and this CRV token, you have to stake it, and then when you stake it, you get voting rights. But voting rights decreases linearly as the token unlocks. Okay, so they try to disassociate between money and governance, right? And because the treasury is huge, right? So a lot of people actually vie to control this DAO. Okay, and that's the reason why then you have very interesting DeFi protocols out there, bribing. I can use that word bribing because it's called bribe.crv, bribing people to place their tokens with them, and then in return they will get some yield, right? So you get yield farming as well. So very interesting, phenomenon out there, and this is just one example, right? Of course, there are other DAOs, right? So this is again, if you Google this, I think you can find it in the internet. Different mechanisms, but suffice to say, I think some propose, in fact, most of the DAOs out here, they require a certain amount of votes to be put up before the actual voting takes place. So there's a temperature check before it goes into voting. Okay, so you need to hold a certain amount of tokens before you can put up these proposals. Okay, and Synthetics, very interesting. They have 6 DAOs, right? Working hand in hand. Okay, so again, not going to go through every single thing. Okay, one last example in terms of some of these larger DAOs. Compound, very interesting. In fact, a lot of the DAOs out there is actually based off Compound, right? You can delegate your votes to someone else. Okay, so this is just one very interesting feature of Compound DAO. Of course, they're trying to upgrade it to a second version of that. And then that allows you to do a lot more things, right? The first version, alpha, is a little bit more restricted. Now they allow you to have a lot more features in there. Okay. Let me also talk about something else. This is ENS. I think all of us have seen this. Ethereum name service. They recently converted it to a DAO. So anyone who has used or actually reserved a name, something .eth, then you are airdropped a certain number of ENS tokens, right? And this is the first proposal that they put up. I voted in it, just for disclosure. And this is how I voted, right? So it's very interesting way of participating in a DAO, okay? There are also other DAOs, like for example, art, right? You can invest in certain projects that you care. For example, Bored Ape Yacht Club, you are not able to, or you don't have the means to buy one, then you can participate in a DAO where they actually collate the amount of ETH needed to buy a Bored Ape profile picture, and then you can actually take part in the upside or the capital gains in case they sell it, or future commercial rights or whatever. Okay, so these are some examples. This is started by a person, and then later on, you know, they went out to acquire more copies of the art. In fact, Please DAO acquired Edward Snowden's one of his art or his works. This is also another interesting one. Okay. Other examples, this is called a Nouns DAO. Nouns DAO, very interesting. They turn this concept of profile picture into something else. It looks very cute, but at the same time, you are putting money. Every nouns so every day they will release a noun. So most of the NFT project out there, you notice that they will just release 10,000 pictures. But now Nouns DAO is different. They will release one every day for forever, perpetually. And what it does is that the interesting part about Nouns DAO is not so much of the NFTs, right? It's more like what they do with the money, right? So as of now, they have collated about 52 million, right? Let me just go to the next slide. And each day, each noun was sold for about 100 over Ether, right? And the first proposal was to distribute 5% of the collection to charities, right? So they have actually passed this proposal. And in fact, most of the ETH sitting there, they are actually thinking of what to do with it, right? So they have not even announced what they're going to do with all this ETH and all this money. Okay, but the interesting part about this is that the founders of the Nouns DAO, they have actually a veto right over a malicious proposal. I think this is important because if you think about it, you can actually attack the DAO, right? Because if you think about it, if you need, let's say, 20% of the voting rights to go through, I can actually collude with 20% of my friends who owns the Nouns DAO. And then we can actually drain the ETH. 20% is quite a good return, right? Because you can drain out 52 million. So, which is why the veto right is very important. Okay, so some other examples. This is My Neighbor Alice DAO, right? So they intend to hand over 100% of the voting rights, or in fact, the entire game will be handed over to the community, right? So this is something interesting as well. In terms of tools, many, again, this is taken off the internet. I think you can Google this. There are many software out there, many tools. A lot of people are still building tools to actually streamline some of the so-called processes or things that we do in the making of a DAO. Of course, the issue is how do you even start with the governance, right? I think the governance is the most important, and then obviously the legal and tax implications of DAO and things like that. Those are also very important questions to ponder. Okay, and the last slide, this is just to give you an example of the landscape. There are many DAOs out there. Suffice to say, I think everyone is trying something, but I would say this is a work in progress. and we expect to see a lot more experimentation. Some DAOs could fail. In fact, a lot of DAOs could fail. But from there, you will always start to, learn what works and what doesn't. And then the next version or iteration of the DAO should be much more robust. Yeah. So that's all I have. I hope, this is something that's a little bit of information that I prepared for everyone. Yeah. Thanks.
Great, Branson. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think for everyone who's listening, who's not familiar also with the concept of a DAO, now you are really familiar, and also for people with a deeper understanding, it was very interesting. I'm curious. I wrote down a number of questions. The first question I personally had is, how does it going with legislation and a DAO in the context of Singapore? Are there, because usually Singapore is quite ahead in terms of regulations. So I'm curious what's going on there.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think just like any other jurisdictions, I think it's a big question for the regulators, right? I think there's no one so-called one answer right now or solution out there. But having said that, I think there are a lot of foundations based off Singapore. And recently I spoke to the lawyer, and we are of the view that perhaps it could be structured as a CLG. Okay, a CLG in Singapore is called the company limited by guarantee, right? So it's different from your company, your traditional private limited company, right? But having said that, CLG, so you have on the spectrum, you have one side which is your charities. On the other side, you have your private limited, which is purely for profit. The other side is non-profit. CLG is in between, right? The only difference is that CLG, they do not have shareholders. Okay, private limited, they have shareholders. Of course, charity is a different form altogether. It's under the Registrar of Society and things like that. But CLG is still under the purview of the ACRA, which is the business regulatory body here, except that you don't have shareholders. But interestingly, it functions like a non-profit, but you have a specific aim. Right, so this is what we think it should come under as a legal wrapper. But again, this is something that warrants further discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also argue that the space is moving so quickly that it's quite difficult to solidify things in legislation, of course.
Yeah.
There are a number of questions from the audience. Thanks for everyone who is participating. I will start with the question from Felix. So what is the upside and downside of using off-chain voting?
Yeah, I think the quickest is obviously the gas fees and things like that, right? I think that's the main thing that people are wary of and things like that. And off-chain voting allows you to get a very quick sense of how things will turn out, and then later on you put it on chain, which is the what we call the finality of it, right? So there are different ways to look at it. Sometimes people want to save gas fees, and of course it happens on L1, right? So that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think indeed with the method that you mentioned to measure the temperature of the people involved in the DAO to vote on a proposal, that is a good way before you open up for voting, of course. That's an interesting one. Let's go to one more question. So from Dino, how and when did you first learn about the DAO concept?
I'll let the rest of the panelists, maybe Stefano or Alex here. Yeah.
So I can answer, like, probably even Bitcoin, it's always been a DAO in some kind of way. So we only have new tools Yeah, we only have new ways of cooperation with a lot of transparency, by the way. So probably that's the biggest difference. A lot of people that they don't fit into traditional corporations or business, because usually in any kind of company we have managers and builders, so people that they do things and people that they just manage. And a lot of people, it's like they don't want to have managers at some point, so they decided to just cooperate and collaborate. And what I'm saying, I was in Denver last week in November, and besides everybody getting COVID that they did, I think I saved myself. But anyway, everything was about cooperation. So it was not important who did what. It was not important who got credit. Everybody understood that by like partnering collaboration, in fact, like you can create a DAO, but it's some kind of like a company. But this company at day two, it may have 1,000 people. And you don't need managers, product managers, and you only need people interested in that specific topic to build that. I'm part of the DAO of at least 3 different DAOs, and I'm building one. And once again, like nobody cares who's building, who's like starting, who's the founder. It's not about the names. Like usually, even I would say like most of the people participating in the DAO, they have pseudonyms. You don't even know if they are really a man, a woman, or whatever. Nobody cares. The only thing they care is like the kind of service of what they can deliver to the DAO in a really transparent way.
Yeah, it's about the contribution to the network, of course, and that's it. So it's a super apolitical way of collaborating, which in this crazy world might be very beneficial for people who just want to collaborate and get things done. I would say.
And it doesn't limit you to like right now the way we used to work. Like you have to work for a company. Not anymore. Like most of the people I know, they are part of 3, 4 different DAOs. They get paid for the DAO. There are many ways, by the way, of getting paid by the DAO, and then of course paying your taxes. But the DAO, at some point, it's like it's borderless. It's not limited to a country. It's completely open. So you decide what company and the time that you want to put in each one of the projects. You get paid for that, and that's it. So it's a new way of coordinating people. But honestly, I think the only way to understand fully DAOs is to become part of a DAO. So just go there, get into one Discord, buy the token, participate, vote. Probably that's the only way to understand what it really means, because at Denver, everybody was speaking about coordination, collaboration, cooperation, public goods, but nobody was about
Alex, I understood you're actually buying a company from Spain from a DAO. Is that correct?
That's it.
How does that work even? Because
we set up
the DAO is not a company, right? So how can you buy it?
That's probably the most funny thing that we will find out in the next couple of weeks, because we have the DAO, we're incorporating the DAO in the States, and then we have a company in Europe. So if we want to be able to pay for people, to pay the people participating in the DAO, so basically the DAO in the States will buy the company in Spain. So at some point I need to go to the notary here, to the local regulator, with, instead of like the signature of the owner of the company in the States, I will go there with the multi-sig, and this is the proposal to buy it. And we passed the proposal. Here are all of the signatures of the people, of the owners of the token, that basically they decided to buy the company. Here is a transaction that we made to the company. So everything is legal, but probably it's gonna be fun to see how the regulator reacts here. Even we have really, I have a good relation with them, but anyway, it's gonna be fun.
But you're gonna reverse establish the company, and then add the assets and then sell it, something like that. Okay, that's an interesting way of doing. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I also had another question for you, Alex, because I know you're quite techie, so I'm really curious. What did you see going wrong in terms of coding and DAOs? Like, what are mistakes that you think like, oh damn, how could these people have done this or overseen this? But obviously, if you make a mistake in this domain, it happens because it's all really, really new. But yeah, what have you seen so far?
Probably, I would say it's not about code. It's an underestimating the capacity of people to do stupid things, I would say. Like usually when we code, when we're working with DAOs, and I'm part of the coder, so we are playing with a game theory a little bit. Like some of the questions was about like how do voting works better on chain of chain. We have full transparency, but it does not always work. So we've seen, like, for example, like somebody voting with their voting powers with their tokens to get past something. So one of the biggest shareholders, they did a big vote. So he had 60% of the, or some 40% something. So he voted yes. And everybody was thinking, okay, then that's it. We don't need to vote. It will pass. And then at last minute, he changed it to no. So he convinced everybody not to vote. And then he changed the vote to no, so he could pass the proposal. So this kind of people.
Yeah, and that's also especially when it comes to the tokenomics. Usually, people are punished for voting not in line with the rest of the DAO, right? So that's also a way of just generating cash. I mean, but you can only play that game in a successful DAO, so it's difficult to keep people engaged with that.
Exactly. It's just like that, getting the right incentives for people to participate. It's a kind of voting that basically you don't vote what you like, you vote what do you think people will do.
Yeah, and I lost the other question. Sorry. I would like to go to the question of Adrian. So, can we implement the concept of a DAO in a traditional organization? And probably the answer is everything is possible, but how would you do that?
But it makes no sense. Like since the beginning, I've been in blockchain, and a lot of people have been trying to use all concepts into new technologies. Mm-hmm. So we have a really powerful way of doing new things, and most of the people, they just try to replicate the same thing there.
Yeah.
Even like I've seen like a lot of work with CBDCs, and I've been part of this work, so I've been working with the regulator sometimes. But the idea of like implementing blockchain for the CBDC was to put a blockchain and then a firewall and then a user system and then another firewall. So it does not make any sense to use blockchain for that. So don't try to fit all the structures into new ideas. Probably they fit. I don't think it makes sense because the kind of people working for DAOs, it's not the same people working for companies.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, that makes sense. And I have a question from Tagar regarding decentralization. So I also have a remark regarding that. But can you please get that question, Alex? So is a DAO really offering like decentralization of work and of power and these kinds of things?
It depends a lot. Like fully decentralization does not exist. Not even in Bitcoin, we see a lot of miners getting a lot of power. Not even on Ethereum. Usually, there's like always small structures of power. And once again, like it's game theory, but depending on the design of the DAO, it can become quite controlled by a few individuals. That happen many times. One of the mistakes that we've been doing, designing a way that's, of course, it's not perfect, and we need to improve it a lot. So depends a lot on the DAO. Not yet, I would say. Mm-hmm. Decentralization, it's really hard to achieve, but we're working on that.
Maybe I want to chime in a little bit here. I agree with Alex, which is, it's difficult to have 100% decentralization. And in fact, I have this, after talking to a few people, I have this view that sometimes maybe you do not want 100% decentralization. Right? Because if you start off with 100% decentralization, then you have this issue of efficiency, right? Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows how to organize and things like that. So maybe for a start, you may not want to start off with 100%. Maybe it's baby steps, right? You start with a slightly more centralized, like most of the DAOs, they have a few founders first and they organize, and then slowly you relinquish a little bit of power. And then you see it, and then you try to adjust. And then if you feel that the community needs a lot more, then you slowly adjust. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's about education. You need to educate. Basically, you have a lot of voters, so you need to educate your voters. And the more educated they are, the more open can be the DAO. Yeah. If not, we've seen that in political systems. So you can have Brexit or many other decisions that were made by people. I'm not saying the Brexit is good or bad. Honestly, not that good. It's a complex thing. And a lot of people, they don't know a thing about economy, about revolution. They were voting about something so complex. It's like, okay, there's this doctor that needs to do some kind of surgery or some kind of operation that's really complex, and then we open it to everybody to vote. It's like, should I put here or here? No, it doesn't work like that. So
it's true.
I think it's about getting educated, being part of the DAO, getting some reputation, and then the more people participating, the better, and then it gets more decentralized. But 100%, I think at this point, it's not doable.
Yeah, because do you also have the the annoying thing that you have the tyranny of the majority, of course, like by default programmed within the ecosystem, which is, from a democratic point of view, it has two sides, of course, right? Because on one side, we better have the tyranny of the majority instead of the tyranny of the minority. However, having a colorful and powerful community in which everyone can flourish is even better. But that's a challenge, of course, to do. And I've seen it with some other DAO concepts which I've been involved in from a long time, that is the centralization part is usually a big challenge, because you have guys who put a lot of fund in from the beginning. They together own a really large stake of the network, and it's difficult to vote against them if you disagree, because you know what happens. Eventually happens what these guys want. So it's, but it's a good system, I would say. Branson, I have a question regarding the question from Ollie regarding tax and regulatory implications of participating in a DAO. Do you have some insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you like what Alex mentioned, if you are paying employees and you're spending on certain things, I think 100% decentralization, everything exists on the internet. I think it's a little bit difficult right now, because at the end of the day, how do you reconcile with the fact that you have to pay taxes and things like that? But of course, that leads to a lot more philosophical question altogether. But suffice to say, I think as of now, a lot of the DAOs, they have to be, I would say, anchored somewhere, right? Maybe Alex would have a different view on this, but yeah, it has to be anchored somewhere. Yeah.
Like it or not, we need to pay taxes, so we need to do it in a legal way.
Yeah.
The only thing good about DAOs is that they evolve fast, and that's good. They adapt really fast, and with the voting, so we can improve and adapt really fast. But then at the end of the day, we need to comply with the regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But to be said, I'm part of some groups. They raised money and they are building, but I'm 100% sure there is absolutely no legal entity whatsoever. They're just building open source stuff together. They managed to do that to get their funds to continue, and they make sure that they can make a living out of that and build. But there's no taxes, no legal entity whatsoever involved, which in this new domain can happen, of course.
Global cooperatives, so they're not linked to a particular country. The only thing, when I'm saying that they have to pay taxes, basically I live in Spain, so
you have income tax.
I need to pay taxes, me as an individual. That's something we need to do.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a question from Hugo. Alex, I think you can take this one because I know Hugo is in the process of considering to set up a DAO for one of his new ventures. And he is willing to take some time and really do this step by step. So we were having a meeting last week, and we were discussing how to do this. And one of the challenges, of course, like if you're new to something, you do it, learn by doing. However, we are operating on self-executing machines that are not designed for that, because once on a self-operating machine, it's out there forever. So how would you deal with that? And it's maybe like a blockchain general question, of course.
But it comes back to try to put this new way of making things into the old structures. It just does not work.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of big companies that they want to go in, and I see a question about IP rights. Basically, all of the DAO community, they believe in public goods. So everything we do, all of it, it's open source. So we give back. And all of the DAOs, they have composability. So we're not trying to get big corporations or big, nobody cares about having a monopoly or controlling the world. They just want to have that done. And if they can cooperate with different DAOs, that's what we call in blockchain composability. Then you just like cooperate with other people. So Treasury can be in a different DAO. And then we are doing swaps. We're doing a lot of collaboration there, and nobody cares about like even big companies like coming to here. Honestly, one of the things I learned in Denver, for example, is like I talked to many engineers from Google, Facebook, big companies. All of them, they were leaving the company.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Big migration from the best engineers from these companies to the Web3 open world, and this is gonna get worse for them probably, and then they're gonna lose a lot of talent there. I've seen that here also in Spain, for example, like many people joining the dark forces of DAOs and Web3. So honestly, I don't know. Nobody knows. It's
thanks. I would like to use this moment to invite Stefano, because I know, Stefano, you also prepared some slides. So maybe we can go through your presentation, and we keep on having this open debate as well. So anyone from the audience, please feel free to continue to ask the questions. Great to have the interactive session as well, combined with the presentations from the speakers.
Sure, thank you for allowing me to run through a presentation quickly. It's 10 slides, it's a bit lighthearted, not very much deep dive, but I want to introduce also some practical things that we are doing at Strips to allow our community to be more part of the management of the company. So the presentation title is Hooray for Democracy. And the question is DAO good? And I will bring a marketing perspective. I started doing marketing when I was 18. I am 44, so it's more than a quarter of a century invested in doing marketing. And of course, there are things that I heard also in the presentation of Branson just now on, you gotta get people that have experience to do things especially when the situation becomes tense, like the market is sliding down and all the prices are crashing, and all I see in our Telegram group is, hey, do an AMA, and like as if the AMA will fix the problem, right? But obviously there are many things that you can do in marketing, and there are moments where you can invest $1 in marketing and render $10 in ROI, and some other times you invest $1 in marketing and you render 0.10. So although I encourage everyone to speak up, the community is crucial. As I say, the solution cannot be found sometimes in a snap. And so I would say that sometimes our involvement with the community, it's great, but other times it's a bit of a waste of time because they propose things to do that are actually not super interesting, or they might not work. But one important thing that I need to say is that at the moment we are just testing the DAO, but we are not a DAO. We are incorporated in Singapore, and we are going to release a governance token for users to vote. And that's where the transition that we are doing is going to be to a point where we're moving from fully operated by professional hired with a contract to basically delegate some of the activities to the community. I want to just tell you a story about the Signora Maria, which was a typical case in Italy that it was a bit sexist, but it was the 80s, so probably nobody cared at that time. But there was a Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster, and Italy went on a referendum to vote on whether we should have had nuclear power for the next 40 years or not. And I mean, that 40 years is now. And there was this argument of many people say that the referendum is not the right way of doing it, because the largest majority of population in Italy is not a nuclear scientist, but is, at the time, was the Signora Maria, the housewife, the lady that doesn't know much more than what the television tells her. And in crypto, sometimes it feels that way. There are a lot of a lot of community members with not much experience. Like, for example, we noticed that a lot of vocal members that we have on board are not the top traders that we have, and we are a trading engine. We are actually basically an exchange for trading interest rates. And then we realized that we have this community that is super vocal, writing nonstop. And then when we go and look at the actual value that they are moving, it's so little, and in some cases it's negligible. And that brings up the risk of a power and the problem of factions. The moment you start asking for ideas and opinions, it tends to segment, it creates parties. And that's what happened exactly in democracy. We have parties that form various factions. Then if you look at some countries, it's more stable with two parties, but in other countries it's terribly unstable. I'll make a few examples about it because I'm quite familiar with it, but just to give you a reference, in 2013, the election for the mayor in my city in Italy, called Reggio Emilia, had among the other parties, there were 5 communist parties, including the Marxist parties, the Marxist Party, the Reformation Communist Party, 5 communist parties, plus all the other parties in a city with 450,000 people. So everyone is in for a power grab when there is the opportunity. It's also quite important to mention a time perspective, because all the DAOs now are quite recent. But then if you look at the experience in politics on how the democracy went, you realize that the more people are involved, the more this problem with the factions tend to split. In fact, later I will talk again about the DAO, but then eventually ended up with a fork. In Italy, we had 69 governments since 1946, government formation with prime minister that changes the government, which is a lot. I mean, it shouldn't be, but yet, I mean, we're not a war as a country, and we have had pretty much we have experienced a decent growth until the end of the last century, but stability is definitely not something that was part of would characterize Italian politics. However, I mean, we are a solid democracy, and so I would say that we don't really have to portray badly the factions or the power grabs, because eventually they could push the prevailing idea to be challenged. On the other hand, we have examples where, like Vladimir Putin, the first time went into office was 1999, was last century.
Congratulations on making the presentation very relevant.
Yeah, I wanted to make it relevant, right?
Yeah.
And I keep an eye on the news to see what's happening. But it is another example. Today, I found this is the CV of our Minister of Health in Italy. Roberto Speranza is 1 year younger than me. He never worked. Actually, he worked once in a pasta maker company in 2004 as an intern. All the rest of his CV is 100% politics, and he's the Minister of Health. And he was the person in charge of the health emergency during the COVID. So this is democracy. Someone put him there. And obviously the parties are the one that define who has the power. And so participating in a DAO is for money or for decision making. I think this is the most crucial point I want to make in my presentation, is that why are community members putting up proposals? What do they want to see? Is the proposal that they're putting up the one that is going to make money, or is the one that is going to make them happy? And very often people come up with very silly ideas just to justify what they think is right, but it doesn't make any sense. It happens all the time when we buy the wrong thing, when we make the wrong purchase.
Don't you think that the remark of Branson here is very relevant, where a DAO needs to have a very specific and clear mission? So a mission that can organize people and to try to achieve that mission, instead of like a country doesn't have a clear mission in itself usually.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Branson remark is spot on. In fact, the next step that I wanted to, but you also need to see what is the mission. Like we all know how it went with DAO. No, the mission was very clear. Then there was an error, and it ended up with the way it ended up. I want to just finish with one last slide on our case specifically. As I said, we are a crypto exchange for trading on interest rates. And so at the moment, we have three markets where you can invest. One is Bitcoin on Binance and FTX, and the other one is USDC on Aave. And so we allow our investors that have the token to suggest new markets to be listed, and then we vote, or changing the structure, the fee structure, or list on exchanges, because at the moment we just listed as a token on a limited amount of exchanges, so the community can propose to list on other exchanges and then release on other chains. These are some of the practical things that we allow our community to submit proposal and vote onto. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot for the presentation, Stefano. So there is a question in the chat by Lorenzo, and I think it is a nice extension of your presentation. So given the potential tyranny of the majority, do DAOs run the risk to become very political? I think in your presentation you already have the answer, but
yeah, I mean, politics ruins all friendships and pretty much ruins pretty much everything. But in business, that's how it works. I mean, politics works whether the people in the company is hired or they are part of the community. Eventually, Lorenzo is spot on. It's not always about making the best decision in terms of making the company profitable, but it's sometimes just groups that come together with ideas that are probably not the best ideas, but it sounds like the best idea in their mind, and they are politically motivated to pursue that idea. So, as Branson say, probably if I might suggest, the stratification of the decision maker or the segmentation of where the proposal can be submitted and how to vote is interesting. The idea of having, or the one that has more tokens is the one that weights in the most, might be counterproductive or counterintuitive, or maybe is the best way to go. But it's very new, and it's more like an oligarchy than a democracy, where basically you have these oligarchs that will end up being those that submit the heaviest vote in the decision making.
Yeah, and I think this is also where it becomes really complex, because it all starts to come down to like traditional mathematics. The agency theory, and so, which I think Alex already stipulated. So that needs to be programmed within the tokenomics, and that moment on which you program it in the tokenomics and in the incentive model, it's also when you are live. So there's no way back. So that defines your success or not, unless you're able to do a hard fork. But that opportunity rarely is there, of course.
I think maybe I also chime in a little bit here. Like I mean, there are DAOs out there experimenting with reputation scores, right? So they assign reputation and then they can slash reputation, things like that. So that could be one way, but again, you know, like to your point, it's an experiment, right? You don't really know what works right now. In fact, yeah. I would liken it to, you know, starting a new country, right? Who do you decide to? I mean, how do you decide on proposals? How do you build a town? Who gets to decide? Should it be delegation, or who should be the delegates in the first place? You know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. I just got, so Alex, I understood you have like strictly 1 hour because you, so I see we have 1 minute left. So I would like that minute, Alex, to thank you for your attendance once again. Very insightful. Have a good day in Spain, and talk soon.
Thanks, Jeff, and see you soon. Bye.
Right. Thanks.
See you, Alex.
Sorry to interrupt, guys. Let's go on to the next questions. So, Branson, the idea of democracy is based on voting, yet voting has major problems. What differentiates the DAO from a democracy that we have nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, this voting thing, like what we touched on earlier, it's it's very, very delicate, right? I don't think there's any single model out there that works, or at least proven to work. So it's all experimentation, like I said. I mean, if you take the so-called lessons from what's happening, I don't want to go into too much politics, but look at the US model. It's too much left and right, and people, sometimes, so binary, and people just, block each other just for the sake of blocking. I mean, to me, I'm not sure whether that's the best representation of democracy that we have seen. So I don't know, right? So, but the thing is that there could be other things that we can work on, without calling it a democracy, right? I mean, in some cases, like I said earlier, it could be that, some form of centralization could be good, could be, I don't know. Again, may not be the right answer, but yeah, so it's difficult to say right now. Yeah.
All right, Stefano, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on that. I mean, I understand that we are trying to figure it out. So Branson says it's like setting up a country. However, I think is more important at the beginning to understand whether we want to continue with the system of capitalism. And so if the DAO is part of capitalism, the only thing that matters is the profit. And so if the only thing that matters is the profit, then everything should be measured based on this only criteria. It is very measurable. Yeah, does it make more money or less money? And if that's the only criteria, then the proposal have to be stripped of all the political connotation and just simply answer to the question, will we make money out of this or not? If that's the approach. Alternatively, it could be a socialist approach to the company where it doesn't have to provide the money, but it has to provide some sort of value.
Yeah, and I think many of the DAOs, of course, have a start within more idealistic roots, which made them very, very interesting, I think. And so one of the things that I think, of course, is different compared with democracy as well is the fact that we have incentives, right? There is this reward component. So I can join a DAO and I can start contributing and start also making some money in forms of tokens, which is not the case in a democracy, at least not in a direct way. Of course, I pay taxes, I vote, and I get public transport, healthcare, and these kinds of things back. But it's the relationship between what I do and what I get is not like that direct.
Yeah, especially if you read, for example, like a sovereign individual, it describes that as being the number one challenge in democracy, because the one that pays the most taxes is the one that gets the least benefits. And the one that pays the least taxes is the one that gets the highest benefits, is the one that gets free healthcare, free education, everything free, because they don't generate enough income. So this system doesn't work in business. In fact, the countries that are leaning towards this type of approach are those that have a massive debt, and then they have interest on the debt. And obviously, many countries some of them have bankrupt even, or they are dealing with inflation. All of these is not desirable for any business, because business should be just moving in one direction.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot. Do you have some final remarks, Stefano?
Well, I mean, the situation of what's happening in these days is fantastic. I mean, fantastic in a terrible way. But if you look at what's happening in the crypto market, everything is collapsing. If you look at what's happening in the traditional market, the prices are going down. There is tension, there is inflation. There are plenty of things that are happening, and I try always to look at the glass half full. And I think that this could be the beginning of a new wave or a new approach to do business. And if DAO is the new way of doing business, then more than welcome. There are so many things to learn from history and politics, and I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to chip in ideas and see in which direction to go.
Yeah, I think it's a great insight, because now you say it, I realized that the crypto space, there are a lot of people from Russia within that space who might be cut off from the traditional payment ecosystem. But obviously, it will not prevent people from still collaborating via the DAOs that already have been set up. So while the rest of the world has all these challenges, the DAOs are robust and they can continue. So that's already like a very interesting part, I think. All right. Thanks. Branson, do you have some final remarks?
No, I agree with Stefano. I think, I mean, it's a little bit cliche by now. I think we are all working from home and things like that. I know we have heard it a million times, but I think this is the new way, right? I mean, and DAO is probably the next step. And nowadays, everyone work anywhere, right? You don't have to be stuck at a single location. Yeah. So that's a new way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a new wave, but it's also, of course, a new wave for people who are fortunate enough to be in that position. I mean, we all had a proper education. We all speak a number of languages. We're tech savvy, so we know how to adjust and evolve with the world that is changing. But it is also like maybe creating a bigger gap between rich and poor.
Agree.
But yeah, I think that's just the world we live in. It's not fair. But, all right. I do not have any further questions. We are already over an hour in. So for me, it was a very, very interesting webinar. So we are of course from the side of our company, we are also working on providing technology to different DAOs. So we are really in the feet with our feet in the mud, and it's just we see things changing every month, every year, and yeah, let's try to work on a world in which we can collaborate with each other without all the political constraints. So I would like to thank both of you for your valuable contribution. Thank you very much. Vika, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan. And thank you very much to all our honorable speakers for taking the time share your experience and also valuable knowledge. And thank you to all our attendees for attending the webinar. So within the next few days, we will share a recording of this event in case you want to send it to your colleagues or friends who have. So thank you again for joining us today, and we wish you a great day ahead. See you next time.
Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.